what Wheeling Gaunt does, there's a story of resilience there that not only does he, survive, but he buys his way out of slavery with significant amount of money.
The quote attributed to him, "It's not what we have, but what we share." Really, he lived that.
Basically, the broad sector the community could get behind his life and what he did. I think he is a significant father of our village.
This story has been expanded more and more, and I think it's important that we continue to expand this story because it would be a disservice and an injustice if we didn't tell the story of Wheeling Gaunt. Because think about it, this man died over 120 some years ago, but his influence is still felt every day here in Yellow Springs.
Wheeling Gaunt was born enslaved around 1812. We don't know the exact date of birth, and he didn't either. But one way for us to think about it is he was a contemporary of Frederick Douglass. It's believed that John Gaunt, the slave owner, was also his father. We don't know his mother's name. She was sold away when Wheeling Gaunt was young, probably under 6 years old. We suspect that he was rented out by John Gaunt. And probably because John Gaunt was his father, he didn't free him, but he probably let him keep his wages.
Coming to Yellow Springs and acquiring wealth, how did a former slave acquire all this wealth? And then to think in a community-minded, civic-minded mindset where he's giving money back and he's making all donations and helping, it's unheard of. Dare to say, who can compare to what Wheeling Gaunt did?
Traditionally, this year because of COVID it didn't happen, but traditionally on the 4th of July, we go to a place to watch the fireworks called Gaunt Park. Gaunt Park was donated to this town by an African-American named Wheeling Gaunt, who was a slave, whose quote-unquote master would allow him to hire his own time out. So when he was done working in the fields, he would go work for another plantation, and they'd pay him, and eventually he was able to buy his freedom.
He started a program where by donating 9 acres, in exchange, asked the village to have flour for the widows.
Eventually, he owned several buildings in kind of what's the equivalent of downtown Carrollton, Kentucky. He sells all that property for about $2,000, which is a lot of money then. Then he moves to Yellow Springs. Yellow Springs in the 1860s was a community on the upswing. That Antioch College opened in 1853. That's at the same time that Yellow Springs is really becoming a town. The railroad came through here, and he cashes out all that real estate in Carrollton, moves here, and immediately starts buying property.
Gaunt Park is where Yellow Springs kids go to swim, they go to baseball. That's the recreation, 9 acres. So many people knew of Gaunt Park, but had no idea that Gaunt was a name of a person.
And so Jerome Borchers, Cheryl Durgans, other members of Yellow Springs Arts Council approached the 365 Project and said, hey, would you be interested? Well, that's part of our mission statement, preserving the legacy of Yellow Springs. What better person to acknowledge other than Wheeling Gaunt? So it was an easy approach for us to be an integral part of this, then to engage the schools, the Yellow Springs community. It was just one of those duh moments, why hadn't we done this earlier?
There wasn't one instant where somebody said, let's do a sculpture. It was more the desire to see this man recognized in a more fulfilling way, and that more people know about him.
We started to talk about where it might be, what kind of funding we might need.
I realized with my background as a project manager for the City of Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, it's a very similar process. And so I volunteered basically to step in because I felt like I could do the kind of work that was needed to bring the project to fruition. And also I grew up here in Yellow Springs, so it's a community that's near and dear to my heart. You grew up learning about Wheeling Gaunt, and the history of Wheeling Gaunt was really the primary driver. And the fact that this is a person in history that's really unsung in a lot of ways.
And it just illustrates the best of Yellow Springs and what Yellow Springs is all about and has been all about.
From the time we got here, it seemed like there was always people who were willing to meet with you, to help you, to, I don't know, it just is a wonderful place to live, and it's a community.
Nancy approached me one day and said, you know, would it be possible to do a life-size sculpture of Wheeling Gaunt?
My name is Brian Maughan, and I am a sculptor, and I live here in Yellow Springs. I've done a lot of figurative portrait sculptures, standing life-size or over life-size.
Brian was an incredible coup for us to have. He lived down the street. He was 4 houses away, and he was a New York artist who had done big projects, big sculptures, and a very sweet, wonderful man. And he was really interested and really wanted to do it.
He was enthusiastic, but he was a little incredulous. He was like, do you think that we can really raise enough money in Yellow Springs to fund a project like this? The way Brian sculpts is to do a nude sculpture first so we can get all the muscles in place and show all the forms of the body, and then he would put clothes on them. And the clothes were basically just little pieces of clay that became, a fold in a jacket or a crease in a pair of pants or whatever. But then you're like, oh my God, they have clothes on. So part of the dilemma was he didn't want to take the time to clothe all 5. And so he would always get the question, well, but it's not going to be a nude sculpture, is it? And he was like, no, it won't be. just look at the way this, just look at the gestures, the way the head is turned or the way, tipped or whatever, the hands, the legs, that's what we're looking at. So, but he had to go over that every time. Part of it was that with the funding having to come from the grassroots, it meant that the project had to go slowly because there wasn't enough funding.
They were good people who got their arm twisted.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they stepped up. It wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
We were able to actually start to kick it off and get collaborators to the project. The Ohio Arts Council was an important one. Community Foundation always comes through, Morgan Family Foundation, and we have a very generous community. You can see the individual and business donations really took off as we were getting close to the $100,000 level. For example, African American Community Unrestricted Fund, they gave us a large grant.
Normally, for a larger than life size bronze sculpture, it would take Brian a year. He would budget a year. By the time the project was funded and was a go, Brian was already ill. He agreed to do the sculpture, and I was surprised that nobody asked me because I honestly probably would have vetoed it. So it's good they didn't ask me, He got to be involved and yeah.
We had a lot of loss. My own mother passed away during that process. Jerome Borcher's son passed away. And then significantly, our sculptor, Brian Maughan, passed away unexpectedly. A beloved member of the community, Karen McKee, passed away. And also a historian that we used a lot of reference material, Phyllis Jackson, passed away. So there was a lot of loss. But those are kind of the life things that you deal with, right? Life throwing these curves and you have to kind of work with it.
I'm very grateful there was a core committee that wanted to be involved as much as they could, and so they were. And when Brian Maughan passed, you know, one of the options early on was to find another artist. Well, fortunately, we found out his son had come that winter and helped his dad on the Wheeling Gaunt sculpture.
So I just brought up the topic, just laying it out, the possibility. And then Anthony thought about it and said he would consider it. And so I put him and Jerome in contact. Yeah.
A few weeks after Brian had died, I talked to Marie. I'm not to downplay sort of the emotional impact it had for me to be carrying on the project, but there was a huge amount of it was just I knew that practically this would be very difficult to start over, or to find an artist who would maybe pick it up where my father had left off. I'm not masterful in this craft, and I haven't spent my whole life doing it like my father did, or decades, but I've done a great deal of it, and I have a pretty good idea what he was trying to do. And yeah, I just felt like I could pull it off, and it would be better than it would, 8 or 9 times out of 10 in those other scenarios.
Even with the unfortunate passing of Brian Mon, certainly that's one of the, if not biggest challenge that we had to overcome, but his son stepping up. Certainly the highlight was completion of the project, the unveiling and ceremony last October, giving ourselves a pat on the back for a job well done, seeing people from different segments of the population coming together for a common good. Those were highlights for me.
For me, that day was a happy day. There was years, that went into this effort. And so, and a lot of people trusting that we were going to finish this, and so that was a happy day, we could have done without the rain, but, we had the World House Choir there, the governor's wife there, so the list can go on and on because, the village is part of this too. I mean, they're a very strong partner.
I was just getting up to give my speech when the heavens opened up and the rain came. The rain that had threatened all afternoon seemed to come almost as soon as I started speaking. So we got the sculpture unveiled quickly, and something that my dad felt really strongly about was that the Black community of Yellow Springs, he was really felt like he was working primarily, I think, for them, or really that's what he was really concerned, that this was a successful sculpture, or a serious sculpture, I guess. I think the way I worded in the speech was to say that my dad and I weren't trying to speak for that community, but work in service of that community.
It was really amazing to see how many people came, to the event to celebrate it. But the piece that I really appreciated was the fact that the 365 Project, as partners, had the youth there, really, in terms of they're the ones that kind of helped unveil the sculpture and things like that. So that was really important.
How do we want this space to make us feel? What feelings do we want to evoke in people, in ourselves? What is it? What do we want to see here? How do we want to feel when we come into this place? And we felt that we had to be true to what the intention was of who Mr. Gaunt was and what he was about. We decided as the site committee that really, and Anthony brought this up, and I thought it was really great as being the sculptor, that we should put Mr. Gaunt on the periphery, as it would be more of a position of power and welcoming. It's almost like he's a teacher drawing people in to listen to what he has to say, as opposed to being right in the middle of a plaza.
It's a living history that we can see, we can feel, we can literally touch. If we touch the sculpture, we can touch when we walk up to Gaunt Park.
I feel really grateful, and very satisfied that we were working in committees and had some obstacles, and people kept at it. I never felt abandoned during this whole project. So my trust in the village character of the people, uh, I think very much is reflected in the Wheeling Gaunt sculpture. I think it's so appropriate that Yellow Springs had a citizen who lived here who is given a wonderful example. I feel very fortunate to live here.
So how do you think Brian would feel about the sculpture now?
Oh, I think he would be delighted. I think he is delighted. Yeah. At the project being finished, at the way the sculpture looks, the energy in the sculpture, the ethos of Wheeling Gaunt as this generous soul who also suffered. My heart is full, and there's a lot of loss. And love. And real appreciation for everyone who's been and yourself who's been involved in this project. I have feelings of gratitude that Brian and Anthony were involved in bringing that project to fruition. Gratitude to the whole community of Yellow Springs and beyond, people who donated their money, the committee who donated their time, to do the amazing and heavy work of getting this project going, sustaining it, bringing it to completion. Jerome Borchers and Cheryl Durgans are two that come to mind, and there were many others as well.
What I took away from it is that nothing is fluid and perfect, and that you're going to have disagreements with people. But what I loved about the committee was that we could work through our disagreements. And it to me highlights, I think, almost a relic of the past when we're in this kind of polarization time period where people kind of get upset and they go stomping off and they won't talk to other people and yada, yada, yada. That didn't happen for us. We stuck to the mission. I also want to kind of shout out Richard Lapides, because he was part of that process. There's a lot of unsung people that I don't think got the credit that they needed to get throughout the process. Their humbleness and humility was just like, well, I did it not for the accolades, but because I wanted this man's vision and voice and who he was to be represented in our community.
I think it's an acknowledgement of the importance of Wheeling Gaunt's life and his acts of generosity and his foresight and his kindness. Looking at that sculpture and knowing those pieces of who he was. And I know that's only a part of who he was, but that is what has been transmitted to me.
And asking the question of why is it important to acknowledge and recognize his achievements? Because again, we're benefiting from what he did. His sense of care about all people, not just Black people. I mean, it would be easy for him to be mad at the whites of the world for the injustice that was done to him, but he didn't think along those ways. He thought about the greater good of humanity, the greater good of our population, Black, white, whatever.